I never thought it would come to this. Lucas and I used to be the perfect couple, at least, that's how we presented ourselves to the world. Our friends, our families, they all thought we had it all figured out. The kind of love that people envied. But somewhere along the way, somewhere between the sleepless nights and the mounting bills, I realized we had been living a lie. And the man I thought I loved, the man I married, had become a stranger. I often find myself looking back at those early days, those days when we were so full of hope and passion. We'd talk about our future late into the night, dreaming about the life we would build together. He was my world, my everything. And when I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't have been happier. I thought, finally, we were going to have the family we always talked about. But reality didn't care about our dreams. It was as though the moment the pregnancy test turned positive, things started to shift. The excitement I had felt turned into anxiety, and the once supportive, caring man I married began to withdraw. Lucas started to spend more time at work and less time with me. And when he did come home, he was distant, cold even. I didn't understand it at first, but now I see it all so clearly. I had never known him to be dishonest, but somewhere in the midst of his avoidance, I began to feel a creeping suspicion. I would find myself going through the bank statements, checking our accounts, trying to understand where the money was going. And then one day, I saw it, the withdrawals that didn't make sense. The payments that he couldn't explain. It felt like betrayal. The man I trusted with everything, my heart, my finances, my future, was hiding things from me. At first, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just stressed, or maybe I was overthinking it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about trust, something we had once built our relationship on. And now, it was crumbling. When I confronted him, he lied. Flat out. He said I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. He tried to laugh it off, like it was nothing. But I knew. I knew he was hiding something from me. The worst part was, it wasn't just the money, it was everything. His lack of interest in our child, his emotional absence, his constant need to be somewhere else, with someone else. I tried to talk to him, to make him understand that I needed him, but all I ever got was excuses. I started to resent him. And that resentment started to build. I hated the way he acted like nothing was wrong, like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I hated how he pretended to be the perfect husband in front of others, while behind closed doors, he barely acknowledged me. I hated how he took everything I did for granted. The worst part was that I couldn't tell anyone. What would they think? What would my family say? I was afraid that if I told the truth, I would be seen as the crazy, paranoid wife who couldn't trust her husband. But what was I supposed to do? Live in this facade forever? Keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't? I kept thinking about our child, about the life I wanted to give them, and I realized something. I didn't want my child to grow up in a house filled with lies and resentment. I didn't want them to see their parents pretending to be happy when we were anything but. But leaving Lucas, wasn't something I could do easily. We had a child together, and no matter how much I resented him, I couldn't erase the fact that he was still their father. But then there were moments, little moments, that would break through the numbness. Small glimpses of the man I had once loved. Like when he would help me with the dishes after dinner, or when he would kiss me on the forehead as he left for work. Those moments kept me hanging on, kept me hoping that things would get better. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. One day, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at myself. I had changed so much over the years. The woman who once was full of life and excitement now felt like a shell of herself. I was tired, emotionally drained, and I felt like I had nothing left to give. But there was one thing I knew for certain: I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep swallowing my anger and disappointment. The resentment I felt for him was eating me alive, and I knew it was time to face the truth. I had spent so many years holding everything together, trying to make it work for the sake of our family. But somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. And it was time to get her back. But even as I made that decision, a part of me wondered if I was doing the right thing. Could I really walk away from everything? Could I walk away from the man I had once loved, the father of my child? It felt impossible. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized that staying wasn't an option anymore. I had to let go. For my own sanity, and for my child. I had to stop living a lie and start living the truth. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But I couldn't keep pretending. And soon, neither would Lucas. The day of Lucas's birthday arrived, and I found myself pretending once again. The house was decorated with balloons, the table was set with the finest dishes, and everything was in place for what was supposed to be a joyful celebration. I had spent the entire morning arranging everything, trying to convince myself that this was normal, that I could still play the part of the perfect wife. But inside, I felt like a fraud. Lucas had left early that morning, as he usually did, and I didn't expect him back until late in the afternoon. This gave me some time to prepare the last details for his party. The children's laughter echoed from the living room as I made sure the cake was ready and the drinks were chilled. It should have been a cheerful day, one where we celebrated his life, his achievements. Instead, it felt like a countdown to an inevitable breakdown. I glanced at the clock, noting that it was almost time for him to return. My hands trembled slightly as I wiped a smudge from the counter, trying to hold it together. I hadn't seen him much over the past few weeks, not really. He had been distant, physically, emotionally, and even in terms of conversation. Our interactions were reduced to polite exchanges, small talk, and brief encounters. There were no more long talks in the kitchen, no more laughter after dinner, no more shared moments that made me feel like we were a team. And as I prepared for the party, I couldn't help but wonder if he even remembered what we used to have. When the door finally opened, I heard Lucas's familiar voice calling out to me. It sounded forced, like he was trying to convince himself that everything was okay. I turned around, and there he was, smiling that same smile he always wore when he wanted to appear happy, even though I knew better. The smile that hid his impatience, his indifference. The smile that made everyone believe in the illusion we had created. "Everything looks great," he said as he stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on the decorations and the food. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before setting down his coat. I tried to smile back, but it felt stiff, unnatural. "I'm glad you like it. I thought it would be nice to make today special." He nodded, his attention shifting to something else as he ran a hand through his hair. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well, but I didn't comment on it. There was no point in asking him how his day went, how he was feeling. He had perfected the art of shutting me out long ago. Guests started to trickle in, and I made my way around the room, greeting everyone with a forced cheerfulness. Lucas's friends and family were all here, gathered in celebration of his life, his success. I couldn't help but notice how he acted as if everything was perfect. He was charming, laughing at the right moments, making everyone feel comfortable. His smile was effortless, but there was something about it that made me sick. He was pretending, just like I was. He was pretending to be happy, to care, to be a good husband. And I was pretending to believe him. Throughout the evening, I tried to keep myself busy, moving from one group to another, making small talk, all while the knot in my stomach tightened with every passing minute. I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone around us was oblivious to the cracks in our marriage. Lucas played his role beautifully, his laughter infectious as he regaled stories to his friends, but I saw it for what it was, nothing more than a performance. At some point, I found myself in the kitchen, filling up a tray with appetizers when I heard footsteps behind me. It was Lucas. He leaned against the doorway, his eyes following my every move. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the underlying tension. I stopped what I was doing, slowly turning to face him. "I'm fine," I said, my voice not quite matching the words. "Just making sure everything's ready." He didn't respond immediately, but I could see the familiar look of discomfort on his face. He didn't know how to respond when I wasn't playing the part of the happy, supportive wife. It frustrated him. And it frustrated me even more that he couldn't see beyond his own needs, his own desires. I could feel my anger rising, the resentment I had been holding on to for so long threatening to spill over. I wasn't sure if it was the isolation I had felt over the past few months or the realization that this was just another performance in a long line of performances. But the fact that I had to stand here, pretending everything was fine, was suffocating. A soft laugh escaped my lips, almost involuntary. "You know, it's hard to believe you walked away from me. After everything we've been through, after everything I've put up with, you walked away." I wasn't sure where the words were coming from, but they felt right. They felt like the truth. Lucas's expression shifted, his smile faltering for the briefest of moments. He took a step closer to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice now laced with a bit of irritation. I wanted to tell him, to say everything I had been holding back for so long. I wanted to tell him that I was tired of pretending, that I couldn't keep living this lie. But instead, I just shook my head and forced a smile. "Nothing," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Forget it." But I couldn't forget it. I couldn't forget how much he had changed, how he had slowly distanced himself from me, how he had broken everything we had built. And as I stood there, looking at him, I realized something: this wasn't a marriage anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. And deep down, I knew that the day was coming when I wouldn't be able to keep up the act any longer. The night wore on, and the guests continued to mingle, laughing, drinking, and enjoying the celebration. I moved through the crowd, feeling like I was in a fog, disconnected from everything happening around me. Lucas was still the life of the party, his laughter filling the room, his charm in full force as he made jokes and told stories. I watched him, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that this was just a rough patch, that we would get through it. But deep down, I knew the truth. We were already past the point of no return. I kept my distance, slipping away when I could to gather my thoughts, to catch my breath. But every time I tried to retreat to the quiet, there was someone else pulling me back into the madness. It felt like I was playing a part, always pretending, always trying to be someone I wasn't. The facade was wearing me down, and with every passing minute, I felt more and more like I was suffocating. Lucas noticed the change, of course. He was never one to miss a thing, especially when it came to me. But he didn't approach me directly. Instead, he'd catch my eye from across the room and give me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I could see the confusion in his expression, the small flickers of concern, but there was no real effort to bridge the gap between us. He didn't ask me what was wrong, he didn't try to understand. Instead, he carried on with his performance, his role as the perfect husband and father, and I was left to play my part as the dutiful wife. At some point, the conversation around me grew louder, and I found myself trapped between two guests talking about something I couldn't care less about. I wanted to disappear, to step away from the noise, but there was nowhere to go. I excused myself from the conversation with a polite smile and made my way toward the kitchen, needing a moment of peace. The moment I entered, I saw Lucas standing by the counter, a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked over at me, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he had been waiting for me to show up. I paused for a second, uncertain of what to do. There was something about the way he was looking at me, something that felt too calculated, too knowing. He wasn't asking how I was doing, though. Instead, he was watching me, waiting for me to say something. "You've been avoiding me all night," he said, his tone low, almost casual, but there was a sharpness underneath. I didn't respond immediately, but instead, I walked over to the counter, avoiding his gaze. "I've been busy," I replied, my voice flat, as I poured myself a drink. I didn't need to explain myself to him, not anymore. He stepped closer, his presence looming. "That's not the real reason," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Something's wrong. You've been acting different. You're not yourself." I took a sip of my drink, staring at the liquid swirling in my glass. I didn't want to engage with him, not like this, not when everything between us felt so broken. But the tension in the room was unbearable, and I could feel it crackling between us, so thick I could almost touch it. He was waiting for me to say something, to tell him what was wrong. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could anymore. I wasn't sure I wanted to. "I'm fine," I muttered, but the words felt hollow, even to me. Lucas let out a soft laugh, but it was without humor. "Stop lying," he said, his voice low and almost a little desperate. "I know something's going on. You can't keep this up forever." I turned to face him, my patience running thin. "You're one to talk," I said, my voice sharp. "You've been lying to me for months, hiding things from me, and now you want me to be honest with you? Do you even hear yourself?" His expression shifted, the confident facade slipping for a moment. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I've never hidden anything from you." I couldn't hold it in anymore. All the anger, all the resentment that had been building inside of me came pouring out. "Really? The money, the lies, the way you've been shutting me out of everything? How could you possibly think that was okay?" I took a step closer to him, my voice rising with each word. "You don't care about me, Lucas. You never have. You just wanted the perfect image, the perfect life, and now you can't even pretend anymore." He stared at me, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. I could see him trying to process what I was saying, trying to make sense of it. But he didn't get it. He never would. "What do you want from me, Emma?" he asked, his voice softer now, but still laced with defensiveness. "I don't know anymore," I said, my voice trembling with the weight of everything I had been holding in. "I don't know what I want. But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I can't keep pretending that you still care about me when you don't." He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. "You know what? Forget it. This party, this whole night, it's just another one of your damn performances, isn't it? You think you can fool everyone, but I'm done playing along." I could see the shock in his eyes, the realization dawning on him that I was serious, that I was no longer going to sit back and pretend. His expression faltered for a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "So, what? You're just going to walk away?" he asked, his voice almost bitter now. I stared at him, trying to find the words that would make him understand, but I knew there was no point. He was too far gone, and so was I. I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer, not when the man I had loved so deeply had become someone I no longer recognized. "I'm not walking away, Lucas," I said, my voice steady, though the emotions were threatening to overwhelm me. I'm just, finally seeing the truth. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could hear the faint hum of the music still playing in the background, the muffled voices of the guests outside, but everything felt distant, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. Lucas's eyes were locked on me, his expression unreadable, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence with more words. I had said what I needed to say, and somehow, that was enough. He took a step back, his hand gripping the edge of the counter as if trying to steady himself. So, what now? His voice was almost a whisper, his usual confidence stripped away. I could tell that the weight of my words had finally hit him, but I wasn't sure if he even understood the full extent of what I was saying. He had been so lost in his own world, so focused on maintaining his perfect image, that he hadn't seen how much I was unraveling beneath it all. I don't know, I replied, the truth of it settling in. I don't know what comes next. But I can't keep living this lie. He exhaled sharply, frustration creeping back into his voice. You're overreacting. We can fix this. We can work through it. We've been through worse, Emma. I shook my head, the bitterness rising in my chest. You don't get it, do you? This isn't about some petty fight or a misunderstanding. This is about everything. It's about how you've shut me out, how you've been lying to me for so long. You think we can just work through it, but there's nothing left to fix. I could see him struggling with my words, his face flickering with anger, then confusion, then something I couldn't quite place. You don't mean that, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. He was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince me. I do mean it, I said quietly. I've been trying to convince myself that things would get better, that we could somehow find our way back to what we had. But every time I look at you, all I see is someone I don't know anymore. He opened his mouth to respond, but I could tell there was nothing left to say. He had no answers. No excuses. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need them. I was done waiting for something that would never come. I'm leaving, Lucas, I said, my voice firm. The words tasted foreign, but they felt right. I'm done pretending. I'm done being a part of this charade. He stood frozen for a moment, his face paling as the reality of what I was saying sank in. His mouth worked as if he was trying to find something to say, but nothing came out. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. You can't just leave. Not like this. Not without giving me a chance to fix things. I laughed, a short, humorless sound that seemed to echo in the space between us. What's left to fix, Lucas? What's left for us? You've been gone for so long, emotionally and mentally. And every time I tried to reach out, you pushed me away. His eyes darkened, a flash of something almost dangerous passing through them. You're being unreasonable, he said, his voice tight. You're just giving up. After everything we've been through. I'm not giving up, I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I'm letting go. There's a difference. I turned to leave the kitchen, but he followed me, grabbing my arm just as I reached for the door. His grip was tight, but I didn't flinch. I had no reason to be afraid of him anymore. You're making a mistake, he said through gritted teeth, his face inches from mine. No, I said, meeting his gaze without backing down. The mistake was thinking this could last. The mistake was thinking we could ever go back to what we were. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the air between us thick with years of unspoken resentment and disappointment. I could see the anger in his eyes, the frustration at not being able to control the situation, but there was something else there, too. something almost desperate. He wasn't just angry at me. He was angry at himself. He let go of my arm, taking a step back. "You're really leaving?" he asked, his voice quieter now, as though he was trying to process the weight of what was happening. There was no more bravado in his tone, no more attempts at manipulation. For the first time in a long while, I saw him as he truly was, vulnerable, confused, and scared. But it didn't change anything. I said, my voice calm, though inside I was screaming. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the sadness. I had fought for so long, for something that wasn't there anymore. And now, all that was left was the painful truth. I walked past him, making my way toward the door, but he stopped me one last time. "What about our son?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned to face him one last time. My heart ached for the little boy who had been caught in the middle of all of this. But I couldn't stay for his sake alone. I couldn't sacrifice myself for the illusion of a family that had already fallen apart. "I'll make sure he's taken care of," I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I'll make sure he has everything he needs. But I can't stay in this house, in this marriage, any longer." With that, I opened the door, stepping into the cold night air. The weight of the decision felt heavy in my chest, but it was also freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing again, like I was finally taking control of my life. I didn't look back as I walked away from the house, from the man who used to be my everything, but who had become nothing more than a stranger to me. There was nothing left for me there. And as I walked into the night, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was finally free.